Hey there, fellow travelers. Welcome to the Tolkien Road, episode 389, or episode 19 in the Do Not Be Hasty Reckoning. I'm calling this one Gandalf's Worst Mistake. In this episode, we continue through Lord of the Rings, Book 1, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. Greta, say
hey.
Hey. Hey.
Hey.
Hey.
Hey. How many ways can you say hey?
What?
How many ways can you say hey?
Oh.
Hey. 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 Hey.
Lots of ways.
Lots of ways to say hey.
Before we begin, we'd like to give a double up air five to our amazing fellowship. Stick 'em up, fellowship. 3, 2, 1. Special thanks to this episode's executive producers, Caitlin of Tea with Tolkien, John R., KG, and Arendelle Hope. Also, a shout out to those celebrating their fellowship anniversary in September of 2024. The 2-year club, Alan C. and Stephanie B. The 4-year club, Dustin Q. And the 5-year club, Robert S.
Woo.
Thank you all
Thanks,
so
guys.
much for your support and for sticking with us over the years. Truly appreciate you.
Very much.
In this episode of Do Not Be Hasty, we continue through The Shadow of the Past as Gandalf explains how he began to track Gollum but made a critical mistake. This section begins with the words, "You have seen Gollum," exclaimed Frodo in amazement, and ends with, "Down at last to the land of Mordor." Again, this section takes place in Frodo's 50th year, aka Third Age 3018 or Shire Reckoning 1418, and this scene specifically on April 13th of that year. We pick up in medias res from the last section, continuing from Gandalf's account of the sad story of Gollum. All right. Well, in case we didn't already know, it's important to establish that Gollum is a liar, right? You might have suspected as much, but Gandalf makes a particular point of this in talking about like trying to get the straight story out of Gollum. In his process of discerning just what this ring is.
Like when he was interrogating him, is that what you're saying?
That's right. That's right. So he says, for one thing, he called the ring his birthday present, and he stuck to that, right? This was almost like a lie that Gollum told himself, insisted upon with himself every day, to the point where he couldn't even remember it was a lie, right? And Gandalf further says that the murder of Déagol haunted him. And so my thought here was this: is this why he was driven to lie, right? Because of the guilt he felt over having murdered Déagol, right? That he kind of has to tell this lie to justify his seizing of the ring and the murder of Déagol, because it was his birthday present, right? He was insisting over and over that the ring belonged to him. It was his birthday, and so Déagol ought to have given the ring to him. It says it obviously turned up just so as to be a present. It was his birthday present, and so on, right? So Gollum just goes through this process of continually justifying his possession of the ring and his taking of it from Déagol.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Greta, thoughts?
And in a way, I was just thinking from a psychological standpoint, I find this very interesting. It's obviously a way that Gollum has found to cope with the guilt. And, I feel like you use the word justifying, like that's a huge coping mechanism, I think, for a lot of people when it comes to those feelings of guilt and shame and things like that. Because Gollum has convinced himself that this, like, it was Déagol's fault, right? Like, if he had just given it to him like he was supposed to, he'd still be alive, right?
Right.
So it was really, again, like, you see that Gollum has convinced himself that this is, again, something that was, like, out of his control, right? He was just doing what was right by himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's so important for Gandalf to get the truth out of Gollum that it says in the end he had to be harsh. He had to put the fear of fire in him. So, essentially kind of like, the image that this conjures up is, of like possibly Gandalf having like kind of a torch, right? And he's kind of has Gollum restrained, and he's like, if you don't tell me the truth, I'm gonna burn you, right? You know, this is like a you know, for many of us, this probably strikes us as like a step too far, right? Like, you know, Gandalf, with doing this, even though it doesn't say that he actually did, like, you know, do something like that, it almost seems like it's a you know, it's kind of like a step too far for one of the good guys, right? That Gandalf crossed a line, you know, by doing this. And you know, I kind of strive to think of like other ways of reading this. Like, did Gandalf actually say that he was going to be the one to put the fire in him, like, you know, put the fire to him, or did he, you know, imply that somehow, you know, Gollum would wind up in worse hands if, you know, he didn't give him the truth, right? And didn't submit to being helped by Gandalf. I don't know, Greta, what do you think of like the ethics of all of this from Gandalf's perspective?
I'll be honest, I don't have a problem with it. I felt like it was, you know, kind of in line with what, you know, I mean, you got to think about the end game here, right? Like, like the fate of humanity is resting on Gandalf's being able to glean from Gollum, like this story, right? So, and it's not like he, you know, he didn't kill him. He didn't, you know, he didn't dismember him. Like, he didn't in any way handicap him, right? Like, he just like kind of he maybe exploited a weakness or a fear. But I feel like the means justified, no, the end here justified the means. That's what I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm just not as nice a person as you are, though. So
I didn't.
You're probably not.
I didn't say where I was. I didn't say where I was coming from. You know where I landed on it.
I thought you were saying that you thought that Gandalf crossed the line.
Well, I think that many of us. So I mean, it's an interesting passage to me because we don't know that Gandalf would have actually done that, right? He might have just been trying to put the fear of it in him, right? We don't know that Gandalf would have actually done it, right? Now, your argument, right, does resonate with me, right? Because there's one school of thought that says, like, you know, this kind of like torture is never an acceptable thing, right? There's another school of thought that says, like, kind of how you rationalized it, right? And I don't say rationalize in a kind of to put down your line of reasoning, but I think that's probably the majority view, right? Is like, if it's a matter of life and death, right? If some innocent is going to, you know, suffer, or some number of innocents are going to suffer, because of, you know, the wrongdoing, right? Or, you know, because this person won't let go of the secret, then, you know, it would seem to be justified. Right. And that argument resonates very strongly with me. I've gotten into debates on these kinds of like ethical dilemmas where you're kind of like, those are the two schools of thought, and you tend to have like the idealist group that's like, oh, you know, it's always wrong to do, you know, to do that, right? It's always wrong to you know, to use torture because the ends don't justify the means, right? And you know, it's like the reasoning behind it makes sense to me, but I'm like, it's always comes back to me with like kind of one of these you know, like it seems like a very ivory tower position, right? Like a very sort of Monday morning quarterback kind of position. You know, it's like if you were in the position of Gandalf, right, and you had to know this because, again, the fate of Middle Earth rests in knowing the truth about these things, then I'm not sure I have a better answer. And that's kind of what it comes back to me, right? If I have to give an account for my actions, before the divine throne, in a situation like that, I've thought about it, and I'm like, I'd probably be okay with being like, I didn't think I had a better choice. Show me how I had a better choice, right? It's to let this mass of innocent people suffer because this other person, won't surrender the truth, right? Won't surrender, kind of the truth of it all. So, I don't know. This is a really interesting, kind of ethical dilemma to me, and I get that for you it doesn't seem like maybe there's not much of a dilemma in your mind, but if for those where it might be, it's kind of like the trouble I always have is I kind of come back to like, well, that's good for ivory tower reasoning, but it's like in the real world sometimes it's a matter of life and death, right? And sometimes it's a matter of like innocent people will die unless you get this secret out of this person or this truth out of this person, right? And then do you want to be the person who has that on their conscience, right?
Well, it's just interesting to me too that it sounds like you read this as torture. I didn't read it that way.
Well, interesting. How did you read it then?
I mean, I just kind of pictured it like a, like we watch enough detective shows, right? Like I just kind of like envisioned it as like a, intense interrogation, right? Like where the bad cop is getting up right in the, right in the guy's face and maybe grabbing him by the collar and being like, oh, you SOB, like, like just being a little scary.
Interesting.
That's, when it says the fear of fire, I was just like, okay, I don't,
Well, that's an interesting, way of putting it. I did read it like very literally in the sense of like Gandalf had like a torch and was like, you want some of this, right? But again, think of it this way: Gandalf is the keeper of the secret fire, right? So
true.
Gandalf could probably present himself as a like being of fire, or if like kind of a fiery being, like terrifying sort of, appearance if he so chose, right? We know that he in different scenarios presents himself in different ways in order to accomplish an objective, right?
Yeah.
He puts a lot of pressure on Bilbo, right, at one point, to hand over the ring, right?
Yeah, he does.
And he even kind of says it in like the sense of like, I kind of wish I hadn't come to that, but I had to, So maybe what he means by putting the fear of fire on him is not that he wants to, that he was going to like burn Gollum or even threaten to, but he just like took on a more like sort of fiery countenance,
more intimidating
right?
persona,
Now it does say that he wrung the true story out. So there's not enough here to like, exactly get to the bottom of whether we are facing a true ethical dilemma or not. Yes, I 100% believe there are times when it's justified to like, just like scare somebody to get them to cooperate, right? Like, but the question is like, so I guess even threatening it probably is not even threatening if he like has the torch, like threatening him in that way is not necessarily, I would say, is probably not wrong, given that if the gravity dictates, would the actual doing of it be wrong, right? That's the question here, right? Would like the imposing this kind of like torture on him actually be wrong? But
okay.
anyway, I think we've had a good discussion about this topic. I don't know. This is I don't want to turn this into a debate necessarily, like an hour-long debate on that point. I think it's a really fascinating sort of discussion to have. And again, the way I come back to it always is like, I get the ivory tower position of like, oh, it's never wrong to, to torture even a bad, to torture a bad guy to get the truth out of them that will save lives, right? But to me, it's like, what other choice do you have at some point? Like if it's my kid and I have to torture somebody to get like, like a bad, not an innocent person, but like a bad guy to get the story, like to figure out where they are, I'm probably going to do it. I'm probably going to do it. Right? If it's my loved one, right. I'm probably going to do it. And it's like, sue me, right? Like I didn't want to lose my loved one, and I want to be able to. I don't want to have to look them in the eye and say that I didn't do everything I had to.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
I could,
Exactly.
right?
No, that's true. And I think it's important here too that the end of that line here is together. He wrung the true story out of him bit by bit, together with much sniveling and snarling.
Yeah.
Gollum was still able to snivel and snarl. So, I mean, he was clearly not incapacitated.
Yeah.
Right? So, I feel like it's fine. It's fine.
Greta's cool with torture, y'all. Just get on the record.
Watch out, guys. Don't get on my bad side.
I know from experience.
Shh. You said you would never expose me.
Yes, sorry.
Anyway, moving on.
Well, looks like more torture's coming my way. All right. Anyway, that got weird all of a sudden. Okay.
Not weird. A little uncomfortable, maybe.
Yeah, uncomfortable for me. All right. So, I wrote here, I wrote this incorrectly. Gollum wanted revenge against Baggins, right? So Gollum wanted revenge against Baggins. How did he know where Baggins came from? Gandalf comes right out and says, because Bilbo told him, right? Bilbo told him when they were having their little, and I can't remember the exact verbiage, but I think it was like, like from, I think he just mentioned the Shire, right? So, in passing almost, and Gollum retained that. So Gollum knew where he came from, right? He didn't exactly know where that was, but he knew the name.
Not Bilbo's brightest moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course, Bilbo probably, I mean, why would he have really suspected that this would come back to haunt him, right? And it doesn't come back to haunt Bilbo directly, but to haunt anybody, It's one of these things. I mean, this happens to people, right? You're like, yeah, I did say that. Oh gosh, I guess that did come back to haunt. That did come back to haunt me, right? It's just something you say offhanded.
Yeah.
Can come back up and, did you really say this? And it's like, oh, crap.
That's why we should always think before we speak.
Good point.
Yeah.
So Gollum comes out from under the mountain, motivated by a desire for the ring. And it says he started to revive. He no longer has the ring, and he's out in the open. So, he is, like, having lived way longer than he really should have. And he starts to actually get healthier, all of a sudden without the ring. And it's interesting. One thing we didn't mention in the last section, in our discussion of the last section, was that one thing Gandalf noted about Gollum is that he didn't fade, right? So he didn't fade when he was in possession of the ring like the ring wraiths did, right? And he said it's because he didn't really wear the ring very much, right? He only wore the ring when he really needed to. He kept it nearby, but he didn't. And so he kept possession of it, but he didn't wear it. And apparently the wearing of it is what causes the fading. So, he begins to revive, to recover some strength. And
can we go back real quick?
Good.
Can you click back?
Yeah.
When Gandalf is talking about, wringing the true story out of Gollum, he says that some other fear was on him greater than mine. Mm-hmm. He muttered that he was going to get his own back. People would see if he would stand being kicked and driven into a hole and then robbed. Gollum had good friends now, good friends and very strong. They would help him. Baggins would pay for it. I mean, is this clearly this is delusional, right? I mean, Gollum is he's concocted this whole idea that, well, first of all, that he was robbed, right? He was done wrong. And that he was going to get Baggins back, and he had lots of good friends and they were going to help him. And, I'm just kind of wondering, who does Gollum think he is? Is this real? This is what he's saying to Gandalf? He's like, Baggins is going to get it. My friends are going to help me. And I was wrong. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I was very, a little confused by that. Because I was just who are these good friends? And, who are, who? I don't understand.
So, I think at this point, if I understand the timeline correctly, when Gandalf gets hold of him, watch out for the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
When Gandalf gets hold of him, and is able to interrogate him in this way, it is well after Gollum has already been to Mordor, right? Which we learn more about here in a moment. Right?
Okay, so he has like
Yes.
all the forces of Mordor on his side.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say on his side. They're using him, right?
Well, yes. Okay.
They're using Gollum.
Okay. But that's who Gollum is considering his friends.
Right, and that he has these other powerful sorts of forces that he can run off to. So you'd better watch out, right?
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. And that's really, and really it's more of, some of their fear was on him, right? He's like, okay, it's torture at your hands or torture at these other hands, which they've actually tortured me, right? And, there's a lot more of them, and they can find me again and then probably torture me again, right? So,
right. Yeah, okay.
So that's my understanding of that there.
Okay.
Well, let's read about Gollum in Esgaroth and Dale. All right, so but from hints dropped among the snarls, I gathered that his padding feet had taken him at last to Esgaroth and even to the streets of Dale, listening secretly and peering. Well, the news of the great events went far and wide in Wilderland, and many had heard Bilbo's name and knew where he came from. We had made no secret of our return journey to his home in the west. Gollum's sharp ears would soon learn what he wanted. So, I think to understand all this, right? Let's consider the map. So, Gollum, right? Gollum. This is the area of the mountains that he lives in for a long time, right? So this is where Bilbo meets him, gets the ring from him. Of course, Bilbo and company. What do? They go up and through here to Esgaroth, and then eventually to Erebor, and then they eventually journey back, right? Sometime after that, maybe a year, 2, 3, something after that, right? Gollum decides that he's going to go looking for the ring, right? So he comes out from under the mountain, and it appears he kind of follows a similar path over to Esgaroth, right? And then to Dale, right? Next to the Lonely Mountain. And he picks up little mutterings of where Bilbo might have gone off to. Somehow he journeys then back through Mirkwood and starts to make his way down the river. And the question is, like, why did he turn south? And the thought is that he was drawn there by that Mordor was drawing him along with all like kind of evil dark creatures to itself at that point, right?
Even though he was no longer in possession of the ring?
Even though he was no longer in possession of the ring, but he was still, very much like a, he, what does it say exactly? It says, he was not done, he set out and came back westward as far as the great river, but then he turned aside. He was not daunted by the distance, I am sure. No, something else drew him away, so my friends think, those that hunted him for me. The wood elves tracked him first, an easy task for them, but his trail was still fresh then. Through Mirkwood and back again it led them, though they never caught him. The wood was full of the rumor of him, dreadful tales, even among beasts and birds. Jumping ahead a little bit. So at the western edge of Mirkwood, the trail turned away, and that's this, right? The trail turned away. He wandered off southwards and passed out of the wood elves' ken and was lost. And then I made a great mistake. Yes, Frodo, and not the first, though I fear it may prove the worst. I let the matter be. I let him go, for I had as much else to think of at that time, and I still trusted the lore of Saruman. And then it says in just a bit here, he made his slow, there's no doubt, possible doubt, he made his slow sneaking way, step by step, mile by mile, south, down at last to the land of Mordor. Right? Something draws him there, kind of the mysterious lure of Mordor for all evil and dark things, and that's why he ends up going back to Mordor. So, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. It said he was tracked by the Wood Elves. This is Thranduil's people. Of course, Thranduil being the father of Legolas. Legolas presumably was amongst those who would have tracked him. And the woodsmen viewed him as a ghost that drank blood, right? So he was this kind of figure that tormented the people of Mirkwood, for some time. They didn't know who he was or what he was.
And he preyed on like the helpless, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it
yeah.
says that he like climbed into nests and
Crept into holes to find the
yeah.
young, slipped through windows to find cradles.
Oh,
Yeah,
yuck.
yeah.
Just when I was starting to have a little bit of sympathy for him.
Yeah, exactly. It's hard to have that kind of sympathy sympathy for him when you hear that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Nests and holes are one thing. Windows to find cradles is pretty awful.
Quite another.
Yeah.
Yes.
So why does Gandalf call this his worst mistake? Why does he call it his worst mistake to let the matter of Gollum be? What do you think, Greta? Like, why do you consider this his mistake, or why would he consider this a mistake?
Well, I mean, given the present circumstances, I think I think Gandalf recognizes that Gollum is playing a pivotal role here in like, I mean, a lot of the bad things that are happening, but specifically with regards to the Shire being under attack, right? It was from Gollum that the forces of Mordor were made aware of the existence of hobbits in the Shire. I mean, it seemed to me like the hobbits were successfully living under the radar for a really long time, and that the enemy didn't even know that they were that they existed.
Mm-hmm.
And now, through Gollum making his way to Mordor, they've been uncovered. Right? They're made known to the mind of the enemy.
Yeah, it's interesting to me, and I think when he talks about this being a mistake, like, again, like, I think we need to understand the timeline here. So, I think there's a lot of this told in like kind of Gandalf is recounting the like Gandalf's Gollum story, and then Gandalf's interaction with that story, and so it can be a little confusing on the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, like, shortly after There and Back Again, the story of the Hobbit, Gollum does the path that we just described, right? And Gandalf kind of has people tracking him, because Gandalf got the story from Bilbo about the ring, so he's kind of interested, like, what's going on? Who is this Gollum creature? All these kinds of things.
Yeah.
And he's tracking him. They lose track of him, and Gandalf kind of gives up on the matter. Probably, like, maybe Gandalf had suspected, right? Like, even then, that this ring was something more significant, and he needs to understand, like, how Gollum got it. Maybe Gollum, maybe his thought was like, well, Gollum obviously went to Mordor, and so he's probably dead, right? Like, there's probably nothing much we can do about it. But maybe Gandalf is thinking to himself, like, if I had intervened and sought Gollum more sooner, we might have had a head start on this whole affair, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we might have been able to kind of get ahead of the problem more than we are now, which he seems to feel like they're behind the problem now.
Right.
I think that's what he refers to as his greatest mistake. I think that's why he views it as such. I'm interested to know everybody else's thoughts in the comments. Maybe something obvious I'm missing that has happened before. But that's the sense that I get from it, that Gandalf thinks to himself, like, he lost time, right? He lost time because he kind of calculated that maybe, and I think he's starting to doubt the trust he had always had in Saruman as well, and kind of Saruman's advice and perspective on things. And so he's recognizing now that, obviously he knows now that it was the One Ring, and so maybe the gamble he had made then was like, well, maybe it wasn't that important, a ring, and Gollum just went to Mordor because he's dumb and he got drawn back to Mordor, and maybe that's the end of that story. But unfortunately, all that it did was clue in Sauron and the forces of Mordor where they might need to look for the ring. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, no, I would agree. And probably a big part of it too is how he's been betrayed by Saruman. I mean, I feel like that's one of the greatest blows, is trusting someone that it turns out you should never have trusted. Because that, in a way, that reflects upon your own judgment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you see how you yourself, you're like, what did I miss? Like, what, you know, like it's just it's a very like, it's a tough thing when you're betrayed by someone that you trusted, and then you know, there's like this whole kind of second guessing, right, of like your own judgment, and you know, like you're like, oh, I just wasn't on top of things as I should have been, you know.
Yeah.
So he's probably just disappointed in himself, right, for allowing himself to trust Saruman, and then realizing like the ramifications of all of that and all the consequences.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's how we're supposed to view this this self-criticism of Gandalf, that it was his greatest mistake.
Yeah, because it's twofold, right? Like he sees it as an own personal failure, right? Like a failure in judgment, but then also the distraction of allowing himself to be distracted by other matters and not being focused on, you know, what was most important. So it was like a twofold error in judgment.
Yeah. Good points. We get, I think, our first mention of Aragorn in this passage. So Gandalf refers to him as the greatest traveler and huntsman of this age of the world. You know, so and I love hearing these little tidbits about like Gandalf and Aragorn collaborating before, you know, before really the story of the Lord of the Rings, because you know, it gives us that sense that there's a lot more stories that could be told.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, Greta, what did I miss?
Yeah. Once again, I think you did a pretty good job.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, even in this short passage, we find excellent examples of one of Tolkien's greatest literary gifts, the ability to weave in other aspects of his fantastical history that entice the mind and make it long for other stories. Who wouldn't love to know more about Gandalf and Aragorn's collaborations and seeking out Gollum over the course of many years, or any of their other separate adventures? By the way, I believe that there is a film series coming that's going to be like exploring that very sort of topic, so that's interesting to consider.
Oh, cool.
In the next episode, we'll consider how an unlikely factor may in fact be one of the mightiest blows rendered during the War of the Ring. So stay tuned.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider supporting us in one or all of the following ways. First, join the Fellowship of the Road by visiting patreon.com/Tolkien Road. When you join the Fellowship of the Road, it helps us to keep on evering on and lands you some cool perks along the way. Learn more at patreon.com/Tolkien Road.
Second, if you're watching, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and let us know what's on your mind in the comments below.
Finally, subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes or the platform of your choice. If you are a 5-star fan of the Tolkien Road, you can help us out by heading over to iTunes or your preferred source for the show and dropping us a rating and review. When you do that, it helps us get the word out about the Tolkien Road, which helps us to keep on evering on.
As always, keep the correspondence coming. We'll do our best to respond to you somehow and at some point. With Do Not Be Hasty, we'll let the mail pile up and then do a mailbag episode at the end of each chapter. While we can't promise you that your mail will be read on air, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, so drop those comments and send those emails.
Finally, don't forget to stop by truemythspress.com for great merch like super styling and comfy Tolkien Road t-shirts, Two Trees camper mugs, and signed copies of John's books, Tolkien's Requiem and Tolkien's Overture. Once again, that's truemythspress.com. Thank you for supporting our work with your purchase.
To close, as always, we'd like to thank our amazing fellowship. We know all of you half as well as we should like, and we've thanked less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Special thanks to the following: John R.,
Caitlin of Tea with Tolkien,
KG,
Arendelle Hope,
Emilio P.,
Jonathan D.,
Richard K.,
Paul D.,
Julia,
Wordy,
Chris B.,
2war91,
Carolyn S.,
Emil K.,
Brian O. II,
Jonathan R.,
Matthew W.,
Daniel D.,
Harrison C.,
Jason C.,
Seb M.,
Will Bobaggins,
Ms. Anonymous,
Andrew T.,
Red Hawk,
Shannon S.,
Brian O. I,
Zeke F.,
James L.,
Chris L.,
Aja V.,
Ish of the Hammer,
Teresa C.,
David of Pints with Jack,
and Eric B.
Thanks, guys.
Finally, thanks to all for watching and or listening. Until next time, the road goes ever on.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.